Welcome everyone. This is Ho-Jang Kim from Kim Coaching Group. Today I'm super excited to have Subha Shetty with us. And she's one of the most amazing women leader I've ever known. So I'm so honored to have her here. And she's going to talk about the imposter syndrome that a lot of women leaders experience. So I hope that we can learn a lot from her and see like what we can do about it. Shubha, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi, Hojang. Thank you so much for having me. Really glad to be here.
Thank you. And could you like tell us a little bit about your background and your journey so far?
Yeah, sure. And, funnily, when you asked me to kindly, talk to you about imposter syndrome, my first reaction was, what do I know anything about imposter syndrome? And what, oh, am I even going to do well in this or not? So, how's that for feeling, imposter syndrome about a podcast when you're speaking about imposter syndrome? But really glad to be here because I think this is a topic that must be spoken about and discussed. So really appreciate and your efforts in kind of bringing that discussion out for us and normalizing it for everybody. Um, I'm currently a fractional chief AI officer and chief product officer at two generative AI startups, and also for two product accelerators in Silicon Valley, where I work with CEOs on a daily basis to help them find product market fit and customer market fit. I was most recently the VP of product at Fanatics, which is a sports commerce company, and I've spent about 25 years in technology in both engineering and product leadership roles at companies like eBay, Walmart, Upwork. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of two startups, one of which IPO'd and one of which got acquired. Um, so by all accounts, I can say that I've had a fairly successful career. And I also have a very loving husband and a 10-year-old son. So we're a small, close-knit family of three. And with all of this, I truly believe that I am living the American dream in a way.
Mhm.
But it didn't start off like that. The journey has been quite different. I don't come from much. I grew up in a very small, middle class family in South India. Um, we lived, I remember, in a three-room house with five other people, and somehow, things were great, and everything just hummed and moved along. The sole aim of our parents was to be able to educate us so that we can get better, higher paying jobs. And there were a lot of constraints growing up, a lot of restrictions growing up. I grew up in a very conservative family, and a very patriarchal one at that. But there was never a dearth of love in our hearts or food on the table. At least that's what I saw. So the career that I have right now, Hojang, is something that I imagined and dreamt of, but possibly did not think it was possible.
Mm.
So I'm very fortunate and lucky to be where I am and doing what I do.
That's a really inspiring story. A lot of people who's kind of feel stuck that I'm not in a good situation, so I cannot get there. I think you are one of those inspiration that you can actually go through. It's possible. Just need to figure it out. So
Yeah,
really
I
appreciate that you
think
sharing that.
anything is possible for us if we set our
It
minds to it.
is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. And you also mentioned that you felt imposter syndrome, but I also want to ask you, like, what are some imposter syndromes you personally experienced in your life? And how did they show up? And how did you feel at that time? And how did it impact your life and career?
It's a great question and a very layered question. So let me address that one by one. I think it's first important to understand what is imposter syndrome because it does get confused a lot with, just being insecure or having low self-confidence, for instance. You can have imposter syndrome and you can have high levels of self-confidence because imposter syndrome is that prevalent, persistent thought in your head that you are a fraud, you're not good enough. Um, it's this unnatural mismatch between your accomplishments, which are right in front of you, but your inherent capabilities that are inside and what your specific assessment of that is. So it's a very judging kind of like a feeling of yourself. Um, and no amount of achievements is actually enough to counteract imposter syndrome. I mean, I remember reading this about Maya Angelou, who is obviously a celebrated, author amongst many other things. She's written 11 books, I believe. And even after she was writing like the fifth, sixth book, which you would think that, I mean, you're writing your fifth, sixth book, you got this down. And she would think people would call her out because she's a fraud. So
Mm.
I'm thinking, you know what? If Maya Angelou faced this, then it's okay that I face this. And it's okay that all of us face this. Um, but I think it's important to recognize what also imposter syndrome is not. It's not a neurological disease. It's
Mm.
not a mental health condition. It is not depression or anxiety or lack of self-esteem. Although, if we don't have a playbook for managing and counteracting imposter syndrome, it can exacerbate your anxiety and your
Mm.
feelings of
Mm.
self-esteem. So I think the first thing is just Kim, knowing and understanding what imposter syndrome is
Mm.
extremely important for us because a lot of and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, and I speak for a lot of women like me who are at that stage in life, in terms of career, personal, family, etc., that we do have a mix of emotions. And sometimes it is difficult to kind of like compartmentalize each one of them. And so imposter syndrome is one compartment, and it's important to recognize that it is one. And if managed, it can remain in a compartment and it can go away. But if not managed, it can seep into other parts. But it's important to kind of like recognize that.
Mm.
Um, for me personally, you know, uh, I have felt it a lot, and thankfully, I have, you know, recognized that compartment in me in terms of the fact that I feel like, I'm just not good enough. And what was interesting for me in terms of like this journey of understanding this is that I always felt a little out of place in many of the, professional situations that I've actually been in. I've been given new roles, responsibilities, promotions. So clearly, other people were seeing more capabilities and potential in me than what I was seeing because this inner voice in me started, getting bigger and bigger in terms of telling myself, I don't think you're good enough. You're going to be called out. And, frankly, again, at this stage of life, as a woman, as a mother, you wing a few things. So when you're winging a few things too, it kind of adds to that noise within you in terms of they're going to call this out. They're going to call out this bluff, kind of thing. So it was first important for me to kind of like recognize that voice. It was important for me to kind of like break down what is causing those voices to strengthen and happen and which situations it would happen. Like I noticed that whenever I have a presentation to the CEO and I'm winging part of it and not winging part of it,
Mhm.
um, the more I wing, the more anxious I would actually feel, and I would feel like they would call out my fraud. And imagine I work with CEOs on a daily basis, so
Mm.
just managing this level of like voice inside me that led to you know a, a situation or a hypothetical situation of kind of like being called out, and was exhausting,
Mm.
frankly, on a
Mm.
on a continual basis. So I think
Mhm.
um, for me, yes, I mean, summarizing, I do have imposter syndrome. It's a very strong voice. I do have to recognize that. But
Mhm.
I think I'm also able to now compartmentalize it a little bit,
Mhm.
and recognize that for me, the way this manifests itself is just exhaustion in terms of like the mix of feelings that I'm feeling. And I had to work on it, very frankly.
Mhm. Yeah, totally resonate that. After I left my corporate job, first thought came to me was I worked so hard the entire my life. I want to rest a little bit now. And I was wondering where the thought comes from. And I had a similar thing because I have to work extra hard because of all the imposter syndromes inside me. So
It's
I was exhausted more than necessary in some
a
sense.
great point. We try to overcompensate. It's that next achievement. But
Mhm.
I think recognizing that no amount of achievement will actually help solve this was actually important for me. So, so to just stop. Not that I wanted to feel less ambitious. I'm a very ambitious person,
Mhm.
but I think started to disassociate myself from the
Mhm.
achievement and the feeling, and that was helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Can you tell us a little bit more details about like you've said that you compartmentalize it and then address it? Like what does that mean for the so people can understand it better?
Yeah, I think we live in amazing times right now where there are so many solutions and resources available for us to be able to, um, kind of decide what to do. Once we have decided that, yes, I have imposter syndrome, and yes, it's at the level that I want to address it.
Mhm.
The most common methodologies kind of and approaches out there are CBT. So cognitive behavioral therapy is actually an extremely useful methodology where you reframe a negative emotion to a positive emotion. It
Mhm.
has variations like, fake it till you make it. You're, thinking you're going up on a stage and making a presentation, and you're feeling like, oh my God, like I shouldn't be here. There's this whole theory behind train your voice and train your mind to think differently. So tell
Mhm.
yourself, I'm excited, I can do this, and then your brain kind of like believes that it actually happens and your body
Mhm.
responds accordingly. So
Mhm.
CBT is actually potentially a great, solution as an option for managing imposter syndrome. Um, uh, I talked about compartmentalizing it, disassociating from the tasks, etc. But I think another aspect of this is also surrounding yourself with the right people, right? Having mentors, having friends, having a great coach, for instance, that can actually see the potential in you and help
Mhm.
keep reiterating that. I mean, we've uh, heard so much about how important positive affirmations are. And
Mhm.
imagine doing that on a daily basis. Imagine doing that on a multiple basis. Imagine having a coach that would actually help you get there in terms of setting that routine. So there
Mhm.
are so many options available, Kim. I
Mhm.
think it's about kind of seeking those options. But I'll tell you what has worked personally for me,
That'd be
because
great.
everything will not work for everybody. So, and I did try the fake it till you make it, but I think my brain is wired in a way that is a little bit more simpler, organic, and straightforward, and kind of has
Mm.
to be believable. So what I did was first actually recognize what are some of the advantages of having imposter syndrome in the first place.
Mm.
What's the other side of the equation, right? Um, and for me, and it has been a couple of things. The first one is that I feel when you have imposter syndrome, or at least for myself, I feel I have a greater sense of awareness of where I am and what I feel. This is actually a good thing. Whether
Mm.
we have a positive or a negative kind of like a voice, just the fact that you're able to feel something inside is actually a very positive thing that leads to greater sense of self-awareness. The second is I don't want to discount the fact that a lot of my ambition is fueled by my sense of imposter syndrome. I'm motivated to get to the next step and do the next thing and do whatever I'm doing better than what I'm doing. And I'm not only ambitious and hardworking, but I think I actually attribute that to a lot of the imposter syndrome in terms of, just giving me that energy to kind of keep moving forward. Um, and then importantly, when you know that you have these voices, I think I have been able to, as kind of like a leader, uh, establish greater empathy and connection with others who I feel have that same situation.
Mm.
And so when I, very tactically, like in a one-on-one, if somebody is a tad off or, feeling a little nervous, um, I am empathetic towards that situation. I put the agenda, for a minute aside and then just casually talk to them about how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that opens people more, that one normalizes things, and that really encourages people to kind of like move beyond that. So in summarizing, one, for me, it's been very important to kind of understand what are the positive aspects of imposter syndrome. For me, it's been a greater sense of self-awareness. It's been a primary motivation to my ambition and hard work. And the third is for me to be able to establish an empathy and connection with the people that I meet and work with. Um, and so, from all of this, the techniques that have probably worked for me, again, may not work for everybody else, but has worked for me is um, professionally, if I don't know something, I will take the time to prep for it. So I try to wing less. The less I wing, the less imposter syndrome I feel. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
direct correlation that I have actually established. And so I put in the work. I do the hard work in terms of doing the research. And you have like great Gen AI tools right now that can do research for you, like as AI assistants and all of that. So doing the work to be able to become an expert quickly on a topic is something that I invest in. Um, the second is staying in the present, not fighting it, and actually dealing with that inner voice and emotion has been really helpful for me, Ojang. And what that means is, the fake it till you make it did not work for me only because I felt like I was faking myself. And at the heart of it, I would like to believe that I'm an extremely simple, honest person. And so I needed to feel like what I was doing was believable. So for me, what that means is if I am going up and making a presentation or like an all hands in front of like a few hundred people, and I'm feeling that voice inside me, feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough. People are going to call out, my bluff kind of thing. I know that I have to deal with it. I will then, put my meetings aside. I will take the time. I will sit with that feeling and emotion, allow it to flow through. And, it could go really deep. And so allowing it. But then, as with most emotions and with most situations, that too will pass. And allowing that to be able to then, turn into a more positive emotion more organically.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that primarily, those two things, the prep and the sitting with the emotion, acknowledging it, allowing it to pass through its regular course, which could
Mm-hmm.
take 5 minutes, which could take 20 minutes. So allowing that time, I think, has been the most beneficial things for me. Although I do want to add one more thing, which is the people aspect is actually a big, thing of it. I mean, I've seen, ironically, that other people have much more belief in my potential sometimes than I possibly do. So I like to surround myself with people who are great and who I can feel positive with. And I have really learned this from Ha. Ha introduced us, and I think she is somebody that has this amazing journey and has intentionally surrounded herself with great people who give her great positive energy.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I don't think I fully understood that, but I totally do now. Um, so again,
Mm-hmm.
intentionally, taking the connections that we feel like will uplift us, and we have a good positive give and take, and surrounding yourself with people who can support you in that, I think is super, super useful.
I cannot agree more. Like this is all very, very good points. But one thing I want to reiterate for the audience is the positive side of imposter syndrome. We keep hearing from the world like, oh, it's just something you need to overcome. You need to suppress it. You need to like somehow manage it. But actually, a lot of people benefit from it. Like one of the biggest things that I see in the women leaders because of imposter syndrome is perfectionism. They see all these gaps, like they work harder and harder and because of they notice the gap, they work harder and get better grade, better ratings, and better promotions. So actually, imposter syndrome was a kind of driver of their success. Just
Yes.
it's the decision that is it still helping you, or maybe it's not helping you as much, but more like a holding you back somehow. That's
Yeah.
when we need to decide like we need to do something about it.
Yeah.
But if this is like helping you to like drive and successful, Like this is could be actually a good thing, but a lot of
It's a
people
greater
don't think
thing.
about it that way. So I really like that.
And it's that combination of that greater sense of self-awareness and
Mhm,
that higher level of motivation for us to be able to seek that, to do a better job than what we did yesterday
mhm,
is is an amazing combination because that's what we all want to be. We all want to know ourselves better and we all want to do good work and we want to leave the world in a better place. So I think those are some of the positive aspects of imposter syndrome, which to your point is
mhm.
overlooked, but I hope through this, podcast, more people will listen to that.
Cool. And I actually seen the spectrum of people with the imposter syndrome. Some people are in a like drive of these waves of the like working hard and making progress in their career. And there are people who says that clearly this is just stressing me out too much. I need to do something about it. But
Mm,
the middle people who's kind of still benefiting from it, but starting to feel the stress from it. Like,
mm.
what is your advice on when to know that you need to do something about it?
It's such a great question that you're asking because, imposter syndrome itself, I mean, first of all, calling it a syndrome when it is so prevalent um, feels like a bit of an understatement, but, we'll live with that right now. Organizations like WHO don't recognize that as a disease, right? And it is technically not a neurological disease. So there isn't, um, institutional data on how much this actually impacts. But, when you read some of the informal data, close to 70% of women actually, I believe, feel it. If you are a minority or somebody of color, you have a
Mhm,
greater chance of actually having imposter syndrome.
mhm,
And worse yet, most people that actually have it, and I don't have a number to it, might actually classify imposter syndrome as something else. So they might not have the right words to actually say it. They might think they have high degrees of anxiety, or they
mhm,
have very low self-esteem,
mhm,
which in itself is a bit of a spiral, as you can imagine.
mhm,
So you bring up a really good point. I mean, if it's on both ends of the spectrum, if it's a little lighter, and if it's just not that critical or not impacting those critical points in your life, then maybe it's a decision to, what, that's a compartment which you don't want to focus on. You have
mhm.
other bigger fish to fry, if you may. Um, but if it's really something which is causing a level of like exhaustion, or impacting your self-esteem on a very regular, continual basis, then again, we talked about all the options that are available and staying
Mhm,
true to you and what option would work for you. You have a really good point that there is this middle ground, which one is really hard to recognize. Two, not people talk about it. So it's only through observation, right? And the third is, the tools are not institutional and systemic. It's,
mhm,
like the suggestions that I came up to are all just given my own personal journey of, many issues and topics that I've had to kind of like grapple in my journey of life. But, somebody who's just trying to solve the imposter syndrome and compartmentalize it might not have the verbiage and the solutions and the tools to be able to do it. So it's a really great point that you actually mentioned. I'm thinking about how best to do it because, by no means am I an expert on imposter syndrome, but I do feel, given I am a little bit more data oriented, I would say, hey, if you are a woman, if you are a minority community, if you are somebody of color, the chances are high that you have imposter syndrome. you know so it's one of those things which is, when it's walks like a duck, smells like a duck, it is a duck. So you probably have the duck, and you'll just have to kind of like, sit down a bit and kind of like break this down. um and especially I think women have a very special connection with imposter syndrome, don't we, Pooja?
mhm. Definitely.
So I think the first step is just awareness,
Mhm,
before we even get to solving it. I mean,
mhm,
I'd like to believe that if you are, a listener of this podcast, you've actually been in the professional work environment for, say, like, a decade or so. If you're managing a small team or like a experienced IC, I'd like to believe that women could be more aware of it. They may have different words or verbiage, um, and they may confuse it with self-confidence, but I think the first step is breaking through that and actually really identifying it.
Mm.
And identifying, if it is worth solving for you or not. Does that make
Yeah,
sense,
totally,
Roger?
totally. Yeah, totally. And also, I noticed that same imposter syndrome outcome can come from different reasons, different deep dive reasons. Some people have more like, I need to be by myself, I cannot rely on other people kind of route. Some people maybe like, I need to be liked. I don't want other people to not like me or disappointed in me.
Yes,
That's like the biggest driver.
very
And
big.
also there are people who's like just have innate like scarcity about the world, like world is dangerous place and kind of a little bit of fear based. And depending on the cause, although the outcome of the imposter syndrome seems the same, the how you should address it seems like a little bit different.
Yes,
Hmm.
completely agree. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like a multi-step process to be aware, know yourself, and know
Hmm.
what works for you to be able to kind of like solve and keep managing that. Very well
Exactly.
said. Yes.
So like for even I went through most of my life thinking I was having this imposter syndrome because of one reason. But then, like this year, I realized actually the major reason is something else. And by having that awareness, suddenly a lot of issues, like I was so afraid to go to a networking event, but now I don't have fear anymore because I know like what was the actual reason.
Yeah.
But it took so long. So sometimes like, when you do just observation, you see the outcome of how it shows up, but finding out the deep inside why it's coming from, where it's coming from, that's sometimes could be a little bit harder. So like talking to somebody else and they may be able to find it out easier because they can see it from different perspectives.
I think that people aspect is definitely
Mhm.
something that is downplayed a lot, which I think,
Mhm.
as women, we should create more forums and communities to be able to, one, not only talk about it, but also really come out and support one another in,
Mhm.
very natural ways. I mean, your story itself is quite inspiring in terms of how you were able to transform your career from a
Mhm.
corporate executive to now the coaching that you're actually doing. And there are so many layers in that in those reasoning that I'm still thinking about it, but it takes a lot of courage to be able to be aware of what exactly is happening, compartmentalize that in a certain way, and
Mhm.
prioritize and recognize which ones are important for you to solve.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I want to change the gear a little bit to like broad women leaders. So like you mentioned that like 70% of women, and especially if they are women and color and minority group, most likely we have imposter syndrome. What was your experience and observation of women who has the imposter syndrome? Like how did they manifest and what's their impact that you've seen?
Yeah, again, this isn't talked about much, right, Hojung? So
Mhm.
it's all through observation.
Mhm.
It's all through, a personal journey of recognizing and understanding it that I have been able to be more empathetic and connect to folks who have exhibited those similar kind of like symptoms, if you may.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the most common thing that I see in women leaders at work with imposter syndrome is one, they shy away from
Mhm.
sharing their ideas in meetings
Mhm.
or in any discussion, and they don't put themselves up for promotion. And I think these problems are actually pretty systemic, and they're adding to the more systemic problem of the broken and, forget leaky, but like broken pipeline of, management promotions.
Mhm.
And let me give you an example. Actually, I was in one of the previous companies that I'd worked at. I was part of an exec review where we were looking at, the candidates in our in all of our teams who had to be promoted from manager to director. We were 1,000-person team. We had approximately 40 percentage, female representation. So
Mhm.
a pretty large number of, women actually did work in our organization at various levels. But the discussion for that manager to director promotion, there was not a single female name.
Mhm.
And I remember, walking out of that meeting, and then actually knowing that 1/3 of the men who actually were in that list to be promoted had actually put themselves up for it. So not a
Mm,
single woman had put herself up for it, even though we had female managers,
mm,
and nobody had also put women up for the promotion. So
mm,
it was a double-sided problem. I remember Ho Jung feeling so confused and enraged
mm,
at what was happening. But I think this is, and I don't believe I'm alone in this. I think
mhm,
we have, as female executives, been in many performance discussions where, there is obviously stereotyping in terms of how women are evaluated, but also there just are not enough names.
mhm,
Even though there are possibly enough, women, we probably always need more at the junior and mid management level, but are
mhm,
not breaking through and getting to that executive level. And I wish I could go to every single woman manager on that team and say, hey,
mhm,
in the next 6 months, like put your name up. And I wish I could do something like that. But
mhm,
um, I think this is a problem that we're actually facing, which is just the fact that, the pipeline is extremely broken. And if we really want women in more executive roles, we
mhm.
have to find a way to, one, normalize this discussion and allow people to be able to express themselves so that women feel comfortable enough putting themselves up for a promotion. And what I
Definitely.
saw in that previous company was, pretty confusing and enraging for me, as you can imagine.
Mhm. Definitely. I definitely experienced a similar thing too. That's why I always thought like women leaders' responsibility to like promote women is very important. Because as a manager, like when I pick like who should be promoted, a lot of men they say like I think I'm ready for the promotion, and I'm thinking nah, not quite ready. But women they never say it. I have to tell them I think you're ready, and they're like I'm not sure. Like no, you are ready. So I did notice that too. So when there is like a women leader who recognize women are ready, that's good. But what if they don't have that? They
Yeah,
still need to be able to recognize and push out for.
yeah,
So that is also my challenge too. Like
yeah,
how about all the women who doesn't have those people around them to see their potential?
yeah.
What can they do? Yeah.
Um, That's a great point. I mean, if you have a female leader that you feel connected to, you should
Mhm.
obviously, talk to them and, not talk to them about, hey, do I want to put up my name or not? But like talk to them
Mhm.
about what is that process? What does that
Right.
entail? I did
Right.
not realize that 1/3 of the men had actually put themselves up.
Mhm.
And so if that is, uh, something that is expected out of that pipeline, then we need more women at the forefront to be able to do that. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is that there are fewer and fewer women
Mhm.
in the executive, in the board level ranks. Things are
Mhm.
definitely changing, but if you read the latest report too, the numbers aren't changing that dramatically, that we're nowhere next to,
Mhm.
parity, putting it that way. Um, so women have to, do this for themselves. And so I go back to being self-aware of your strengths, of
Mhm.
your opportunities, recognizing imposter syndrome, but at the
Mhm.
same time, having the discussion in terms of what you would like to achieve from a career
Mhm.
standpoint is, I think, so critical, in discussions. And women should be sharing more in discussions. Like, I almost not never have big meetings right now because I can almost in the list of attendees say who are the two, three people that are going to dominate the discussion.
Mhm.
And I wish I could have, and I wish I could say, you know what, this this woman or this female would actually dominate the discussion. That has actually
Mhm.
been completely the exception than the rule. So I'd love to get to a place where, you know, um, I'd like to believe that this is an equal opportunity, across the board. So women should step up and share their ideas in discussions, in meetings, in water cooler conversations. Like that's the first step to getting noticed, before you put yourself up for promotion, for instance.
Definitely. I think also the earlier point you made about having the right support network, the people who sees your potential and value and keep them around you will also help you to see what is your true value is and have more confidence in speaking up in those situations. So
Absolutely.
important. Mhm.
Absolutely. I mean, just on the other side of things, there were a couple of women and product leaders at the company that I'd worked for previously who, even though we did not work directly with one another, reached out and established a connection with me.
Mhm.
And there were others that didn't, for whatever reason. Um, when it comes to possibly like a performance evaluation or something, when a few of us executives are poring over some information, who do you think I would have a connection with? Right.
Right.
So I think it's very important to use the resources that you have right now, to your point, Hojung, and just see who your advocates can be in just the environment that you're working with. Introduce yourself, present some new ideas, start the conversation of like developing the relationship. And if there is imposter syndrome in terms of something that's telling you, oh, I'm not good enough, that person's not going to listen to me, what is the worst that can happen if you go and approach them? That person might say that they don't have the time. So
Mhm.
that's not on you, it's on them.
Mhm.
So I would say, just take that first step, women at
Mhm.
work. Go reach out to that female executive. Go reach out
Mhm.
to, and I'm not just saying female executive, any executive
Mhm.
that you feel like you can establish a relationship with, who
Mhm.
can, in very direct and indirect ways, advocate for you. And don't let your imposter syndrome stand in the way of that.
Absolutely. And I actually heard from a lot of women leaders that the mentors who actually saw the potential in them and helped them to grow a lot are male managers. So it's not just about
Absolutely.
male versus female. It's about
Not at
people
all.
who sees your potential and support you.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think we should give everybody the benefit of doubt, especially men at work who also have a lot of challenges coming into work, being the, breadwinner for the family. These are challenges too that men face. And so just being cognizant of the fact that, their challenges might be something else and different. But yes, just managing your imposter syndrome and doing it, reaching out in a way that is natural to you, I think will be very effective for women at work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And have you ever seen any women leaders who overcame those imposter syndrome and made some drastic changes?
It's a great question. Again, it's not talked about as much, right? So you never know whether what they are facing or what they have transformed is imposter syndrome or something else, or
Mhm.
and there are so many layers to what
Mhm.
everybody faces as work, not just
Mhm.
women leaders.
Mhm.
Women leaders just have, I think, a few more things stacked up against them, given primarily, I think, through COVID. um, the McKinsey report mentioned, however you slice and dice this,
Mhm.
primary caregiving responsibilities at home with families fell on women. Like it was just
Right.
an overwhelming,
Mhm.
kind of like evidence of that. And so
Mhm.
those, we're still coming off that, right? We
Mhm.
talk about being in a post-COVID scenario, but a lot of the caregiving responsibilities is women,
Mhm.
whether it's with children or older, adults, etc. So again, I wish these transformations were spoken about more so you can only maybe gauge some of that. I mean, I
Mhm.
feel you're a great example, Kim. I mean, just
Mhm.
listening to your journey of how you, not only transition from a corporate job to a coaching job, but actually the mental, emotional, spiritual struggle that you had. And I'm sure there is a lot more than imposter syndrome possibly going on there, and it's a lot more layered and complex. But just the fact that you were able to, follow your passion and do something that you felt was important for you, and also in service and support of other women leaders, I think that's a classic example of, a successful transformation of overcoming, I'm sure, imposter syndrome, and I'm sure, other things. So I
Mhm.
would say you're a great example and you're a great inspiration. And so you should get your story out there more. Um, but I can think of one example, a little early on where I was in business school. Um, I was interning at PepsiCo. Um, the CEO of PepsiCo at that time, Steve Reinemund, was an alumnus of the business school that I had graduated from. And Indra Nui, who is my idol, I don't
Mhm.
idolize people much, but like I do think I idolize her,
Mhm.
um, was the CFO at that time. And they somehow a meeting got arranged with Indra Nui and myself. I think I was supposed to meet Steve, but I think he was not available. So they took me into a meeting with Indra Nui. I was tongue-tied, because I was at that time actually, I remember I hadn't yet gotten the internship. So I was interviewing for the internship. It was a high profile kind of a leadership development associate where you rotate around certain functions, etc. Very exciting for me. And I remember walking in and telling her, and I had prepared because I was a software engineer before, so I had prepared like how is this going to work between software engineering and CPG right now? So I had prepared my story of what are all the transferable skills between engineering and CPG, and so I walked in going, and ma'am, I want to tell you about my skills, and she just did this. And she said, I can see your skills. I can see that you're pretty talented. And then I said, but I'm a fast learner. I will learn CPG very quickly. I will learn the industry. And she did this again, and she said, "It's okay. I didn't know CPG when I came to, and I'm the CFO of the company."
Wow.
And at that moment, Hojang, and that was, I think, when if you have like few memorable moments in your career, I think that was a moment for me because she just completely normalized it. She
Mhm.
said that she didn't know something herself and she is at the top of her game at this company,
Mhm.
which then she eventually went on to become the CEO and was known as one of the more prolific CEOs in American, corporate life, if you may. So just the fact that she normalized it built
Mhm.
so much confidence in me.
Mhm.
And I think it was the long-term validation that I need. I still think of that incident when I'm thinking of, when I have that inner voice and I'm sitting with it and I'm managing it and allowing it to flow through. I still think of that incident because I'd like to believe, Hojung, that most women face imposter syndrome, but if they were generally, they're at the top of their career, the odds are
Mhm.
potentially a little against them, both internally and externally. But it's more the exception than the rule that they haven't faced imposter syndrome. Most women have.
Mhm.
And actually, just knowing and recognizing that from somebody um, as great as Indra Nui did,
Mhm.
gave me a whole sense of confidence, I think, just in myself. So I really admire women who are able to, kind of keep doing what they are doing. And it doesn't have to be that you're a CFO or a CEO. My admiration comes from just women who are generally just very self-aware, are
Mhm.
able to kind of like normalize this in a
Mhm.
very casual, organic way and possibly they don't even realize it in terms of how much they are helping others by actually doing
Mhm.
that. So, yeah, I would say, going back to, you asked me for some examples of transformations. I would say you are one. Your story of transformation is very inspiring. And I would say, yeah, Indra Nui and how she normalized it for me at that time is something, a professional moment that I keep going back to often.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so obvious that you are the one of the inspiration by sharing your imposter syndrome here too. I was asking the questions because a lot of people are suffering and we hear about it, all these things that's blocking them, but
Yeah.
we don't really hear from successful women that I had it too. So I think that's why it's important to know that like you and me and like the CEO, like even successful people, we all been there and then maybe we are still having some of those things living with us. And knowing that can really open up the possibility for a lot of women who's struggling. Maybe I'm not the leadership material. Like, yeah, you are.
You are.
Hmm.
I didn't know what the role entailed before I signed up for it too. And look, I'm here. So, I think just normalizing it in very normal, organic words, I think has been for me very powerful. And I try to do that because for me, actually going into a conversation and saying, yes, I have imposter syndrome too. Do you have imposter syndrome? Is a
Mhm.
bit more of a forced discussion where people might not be able to or ready to discuss it. But like,
Mhm.
I take great inspiration from what Indra ma'am said at that time. I didn't know
Mhm.
CPG too, but I'm the
Mhm.
CFO right now.
I
Uh,
know.
that was so organic and so
I know.
natural.
And that's coming from this deep confidence. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
The people who don't have confidence will say, like, what is your education? What's your experience? Do you know this? Do you know that? But people who've been there, like, it's okay. I know you can do it. I
Yes.
also see the differences in the leaders, like who has the confidence versus not. So it's
Yeah.
very refreshing to hear that.
And just the fact that she had that confidence in me,
Mhm.
without knowing me,
Mhm.
very deeply or closely, I think is just, it's again a lesson for me to trust people
Mhm.
more, to have confidence in
Right,
people more,
right.
to not just hire for the technical skills, but to hire
Mhm.
for more, softer skills, because those are the harder things to achieve and change. You can learn the
Mhm.
technical side, stuff,
Definitely.
whether it's CPG or whether it's commerce, you can learn all
Right,
that.
right, exactly.
So I think I just learned so much from that too, from that interaction.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing the value of your experience. So I think it's we discussed all the things we wanted to discuss originally. Is there any like final thoughts or tips that you want to share to the audience?
Yeah, I think the main again, I'm honored that you're asking me this question, Hojung, and I take this responsibility of answering this question seriously. I'm not an expert on imposter syndrome or the research of it. I just happen to have it and know that I have it, and I have my tools to be able to kind of manage and deal with it. Um, so I think my biggest tip overall would just be know if you have it or not.
Mhm.
If you have it, um, know if it is important enough for you to address it or not.
Mhm.
Um, because, there are lots going on. There is a lot going on in life, So if it's, impacting a very small part of your life that is not very highly critical, etc., don't bother about it.
Mhm.
But if it is impacting your work, if it is impacting, your perception at work, if it is impacting your sharing of the ideas, if it's impacting your promotion, if it's impacting your salary, that's a big deal. We all spend a lot of time at work doing what we're doing. So I would encourage you to then kind of recognize that and then devise a plan according to what works best for you. There are
Mhm.
so many options, as I mentioned, that is available. There's CBT, there is isolation and compartmentalization. There is just very simple kind of like deep breathing and kind of staying in the moment and dealing with it. Then there are people aspect of things, surrounding yourself with mentors, friends who are able to see the light in you, and getting a coach to be able to reinforce, that positive side and aspect, of your personality, whether it's personal or professional. All of these and a combination of all of these will not work for everybody. So find out what works for you and get on that journey of what works for you. And I can guarantee that it's a journey. One, it's a journey more than a destination. So enjoying the journey is also important. But when you do it in a way that is natural to you, that is true to yourself, um, I can only imagine that that voice inside of you will become smaller and smaller. And my hope and wish is that the 70% of anecdotal kind of like data for women, minorities, women of color, etc., is dramatically reduced because one, we have normalized it, we're talking about it, we're supporting one another, and we have the tools now to be able to kind of, deal and manage with this. So imposter syndrome should be a very small voice in our heads and hearts,
Mhm.
in our way to what we really want to achieve in our lives and our mission. So that's my hope for all women out there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I do agree. It is something you can do. Until you get there, it feels impossible. But a lot of people pass through that and then look back and see, like, it's possible, come over.
Absolutely.
So, like, just need to find the right solution. And you can try a lot of things you mentioned and see what works because everybody has different things that work for them. So, really appreciate
Absolutely.
your advice.
Thank you so much again. It was wonderful just reliving some of my professional and personal memories and talking about this with you. And I really hope this is helpful for your audience.
I do believe so. I think just hearing your own example is already helpful, but you also gave a lot of tips on how to identify what you can do. I think this is like super helpful for people. So thank you so much for your taking time and also sharing your experience and wisdom. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Hojan. Nice to be
Okay.
here.